This one is a doozy. It's October. People are asking questions about Halloween. They want to know answers. And so I put together a lesson tonight on the topic of Halloween. Should Christians celebrate it? Should they not celebrate it? I hope you guys find this helpful. And I hope that I can give you some principles on how to think through holidays in general as a Christian. First and foremost, you have to recognize that the question of Halloween and celebrating different holidays has primarily to do with your question of Christ and culture. What is Christ and culture? How should Christians interact with the culture around us? This is a very key question, a very key idea. In particular, I have two questions. I got these from Timothy Keller, guys. These are two questions that are going to color how you view holidays and how you view whether or not we should practice them. The first question is, should we be pessimistic or optimistic about the possibility for cultural change? If you're more optimistic about the possibility of cultural change, you're generally going to be more open to celebrating secular holidays. If you are pessimistic about the possibility for cultural change, you're generally going to be less open to celebrating secular holidays, okay? The second question we need to ask when it comes to Christ and culture is, do you believe that the culture is fundamentally fallen, or is it redeemable and good? Basically, how much common grace do you think there is out there in the world and out there in the society? Do you see the world as mostly a bunch of sinners with a glimmer of God's Spirit in them? Do you see them mostly as a bunch of heathens, but there's just a speck, or the image of God is barely visible in them? Or do you see it reverse, where they are mostly made in the image of God, but they're slightly fallen or they slightly struggle, and that's why they do the things that they do? How you answer these two questions is going to fundamentally affect how you address the question of Halloween in particular and holidays in general. So, these two questions lead us to four basic positions, okay? There are four basic positions on Christ and culture. And what this does is it begins to demonstrate to you where the issues lie when it comes to these things. Now, this is a brief overview, guys. But once you recognize these are the two questions that need to be asked, and you recognize that this is going to put you in the quadrant, then you begin to see how these things are relevant, okay? Let me briefly go over each model. Two Kingdoms model essentially says people are good, but they're pessimistic about cultural change. What Two Kingdoms says is that there's a kingdom of man and there's a kingdom of God. God's kingdom is entirely spiritual and heavenly. Man's kingdom is entirely fleshly and carnal. God's kingdom is good, and we belong to God's kingdom, but man's kingdom also is bad, and we shouldn't worry about getting involved in man's kingdom. So people who are of the Two Kingdoms model are generally going to be a little bit more pessimistic about practicing secular holidays because they think of these things in somewhat pessimistic terms. That's man's realm. That's man's kingdom. We should be focused on God's kingdom. We should be focused on the gospel. They don't care much about cultural change because they don't care much to get involved in man's kingdom. I hope that makes sense. That's the Two Kingdoms model. Counterculturalist model is also pessimistic. We shouldn't get involved in man's realm, but they also see everything as fundamentally fallen. I jokingly call the counterculturalist model bomb shelter Christianity. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I know it comes across that way, but I call it bomb shelter Christianity because they're pessimistic about cultural change and they believe that it's fundamentally fallen. And so what they essentially do is they don't want to get active or involved in the culture. And what they're going to do is basically stay out of the culture. The culture is going to taint us. We don't want that to happen. We must remain apart. We must remain countercultural. We must remain holy. We're God's people, right? We remain holy. We stay away from all that other stuff. Okay? Now, here's what I want to say. We're talking about Halloween. We're talking about holidays in general. Halloween or holidays in general. People who are against Halloween or holidays in general likely fall in under a Two Kingdoms or a counterculturalist model. They're going to be generally more pessimistic about those things. Okay? Whereas people who are open to Halloween or holidays in general probably fall more on the relevance model or transformationist model side, okay? Transformationalists essentially say this: we need to take the secular holidays and redeem them for Jesus, right? Halloween, Was it pagan? I don't care. It's going to be Jesus holiday soon, right? And that's what the transformationist says. They say, look, the culture has fallen. Yes, that's true. They agree with the counterculturalist in that regard, but they're not pessimistic, but instead optimistic about the possibility of change. I want you to know that post-millennialists are often transformationists. They believe in change, radical change, that the gospel will be effective, and so they lean in this direction, where they say, yeah, you can celebrate Halloween, but you celebrate it for Jesus. We're taking Halloween over for Jesus, right? So that's more of a transformationist perspective. Finally, relevance model. Relevance model thinks that society or mankind is generally good and they're generally optimistic. This model often would celebrate Halloween and not even be worried about taking it over for Jesus, right? They wouldn't even care. They'd be like, Halloween's just fine as it is. I'm just going to participate. No big deal. It's whatever, right? They don't care because, again, you can see they're optimistic and they think things are generally good, okay? So transformationists generally want to redeem holidays or capture the culture and society for Jesus. Relevance thinks that the society and culture in general are mostly fine, and so they're just going to be cool with it all, and they're going to embrace whatever, not thinking that it's compromising. And then counterculturalists and two kingdoms, to varying degrees, are going to say, yeah, we shouldn't participate in this. This isn't good. It's drawing us away, etc. Okay? Somebody asked, where do I fall? I just want you guys to know, this is where Pastor Tanner generally falls. Right here in the transformationist camp. This is generally where I'm at. So that's the first part of the presentation. We have to understand Christ and culture, okay? Once we've understood Christ and culture, there's one more thing we need to consider. And that is, I think there are essentially three stances. In fact, I'm going to do that on here as well. I think there's a scale here, a sliding scale that essentially people fall onto, okay? This is a sliding scale of arguments, all right? So let me just show you this, guys. And I think there's essentially three positions here. The first position and the most fundamental position says, look at its origins, okay? Look at its pagan origins, okay? That's the first and most strict position, okay? The next position is probably somewhere in the middle, and it says, I'm not so worried about the origins, but I'm worried about how it's practiced right now, okay? I'm worried about how it's practiced right now. Its current practice. And finally, the last stance essentially says, neither of these matter. Okay? Now, here's why I'm going into this, guys. If you believe that the origins of Halloween, being pagan, is what really affects it, then you should also be against Christmas. Okay? And some people take the stance. I don't know if you guys know this, but some Christians take this stance. So Halloween is out for sure, but also Christmas is out. Okay? Christmas is also out. Why? Because Christmas has pagan roots as well. And the fact that their origins are both pagan means that we shouldn't celebrate either of them. Okay? If you're worried about origins, Halloween should be out and Christmas should be out. They have pagan origins, they have pagan roots, and that is why they're out, okay? So that's this stance over here on the far side. In the middle, if you're worried about how it's currently practiced, how the holiday is currently practiced, then Halloween is out because it's practiced in a satanic way or it's practiced in a demonic way, but Christmas is in. You see what I mean? Christmas would be in this situation because the way it's currently practiced is glorifying and honoring to Jesus, whereas Halloween isn't glorifying and honoring to Jesus. And finally, if you think that origins or practice don't matter, then Halloween is in and Christmas is in. Now, if you have a problem with Halloween as practice, this also gives you a separate option here. Halloween could be in, but with an adjustment made, okay? So, or, I want there to be a big or here, or Halloween is in, but it is adjusted to take out demonic stuff, okay? If I could put it that way. So, if you're objecting to how it's practiced, you can take this middle stance of Halloween is in, but it's adjusted to take out the demonic stuff. So how is this practiced? I've run into people this way, right? This is how it's practiced. People will say, we celebrate Halloween, but we don't dress up like demons, devils, witches, or anything like that. We only dress up like princesses, or we only dress up like things like that. Or we'll carve pumpkins, but we'll carve Jesus Saves into the pumpkin. You see what I mean? They don't like how Halloween is being practiced currently, but they're still celebrating it just in a different way, okay? And that's that middle stance that many take, okay? So here's, I think, a successful way to apply how to practice it, okay? A successful way to apply how you practice it. It's going to depend on if you think its origins matter at all, and if you think that the practicing of it needs to be adjusted, or if none of those things matter. Now, I want you to know that I think the relevance model and the idea that neither of these matter, I think that's a little too much. I think that's giving in a little bit too much to the culture at large, okay? So the idea that neither of these things matter, or the relevance model, I think is giving up too much as a Christian. I personally hold to a transformationalist model, and I would fall in this middle category. I think it's okay to practice Halloween, but I want to redeem the holiday for Jesus. Now, what does that look like? I think giving candy is okay on Halloween, for example. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if I'm trying to redeem it for Christ, I want to give away the best candy, and I'm going to include a gospel tract with it, right? I'm going to say, here's a king-size Butterfinger, and take this gospel tract. It has a Christian message on it. That's what I'm going to do, because I'm more of a transformationist, and I think we can redeem these holidays for Jesus. And here's my argument. There's not a specific biblical passage on this, but here's my argument. We as Gentiles all used to be pagan, okay? We worshipped Roman gods, we worshipped Greek gods, we worshipped Norse gods, we worshipped Egyptian gods, right? We all used to be pagan, and Jesus redeemed us and is now bringing us into his kingdom. So if God can redeem us, if Jesus can redeem us from these pagan things that we once followed, I think Jesus can also redeem our pagan holidays, if you will. He takes the paganism out of the pagan, if that makes sense, and makes them Christian. And so too, I think we can take the paganism out of Halloween and make it Christian. And I think we actually did that in the past with Christmas. Christmas used to be pagan, I hope you guys know. It celebrates the winter solstice. There is no way, essentially, Jesus was born on December 25th. Almost no chance at all. And yet, we have essentially redeemed that holiday for Christ as Christians down through history. And I think we can, and now what do you hear? Jesus is the reason for the season, right? And even secular people often have to admit, like, yeah, Christmas is about Jesus. That has been a transformation over many, many years. And I think we can do the same thing with Halloween. And so as a transformationist, I believe that it's okay to practice Halloween, but we need to be redeeming it for Christ. The way I would do that, I'm an evangelist, guys. How often do people come to our door and knock on our own door, ready and willing to hear the gospel? Now, I wouldn't preach at every kid that came to my door, but I would hand out gospel tracts and the best candy. I'd be like, here, I got a gospel tract for you, and here's a share size Butterfinger. You know what I mean? That way they're like, wow, that Christian gives the best candy out, and he gave me this gospel tract, and they might read it. I think we can redeem it for Christ in that sense, and that's my personal stance. Now, one final note. I want you guys to know that I used to be of this persuasion. I used to be of this entire persuasion right here. So I get it, okay? I get the argument that it's about origins. We need to be in the world, but not of the world. And I used to actually reject Christmas as well, because I didn't think Christmas could be redeemed either. I thought it had pagan origins. But I've since changed in my thinking on this topic, and that's where I've landed over here. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. I respect people who have these opinions, okay? I respect them. But I want you to know this is currently where I sit. I want to redeem all holidays for Jesus, and I hold to a more transformationist model, okay? I'll take some final questions before we close it out. Vector says, what if you don't do candy, but you just celebrate privately because it's fun? Skeletons, witches, and all. I'm okay with that as well. And I know some people would disagree with that, but I'm okay with that as well. I don't think there's anything inherently demonic about skeletons, witches, or anything like that. Carving pumpkins. I don't think there's anything inherently demonic about anything like that, right? But It's kind of about the power you're assigning to the things themselves, okay? So I would be okay if somebody wants to do that, but ultimately, what's going on in my mind is how can we redeem this holiday for Christ? That's what's going on in my mind. Anarchy Marky says, I agree. I try to refrain from taking part in the Halloween, but I think it's a good thing to have as an opportunity to spread the gospel. Exactly right, Anarchy Marky. And I want you to know that part of what influenced my thinking on this was an article by John Piper where he says the exact same thing. John Piper advocates for a redeeming of Halloween mentality. It's a hot topic. It's an absolute hot topic, and Christians are really divided on this. But that's part of why I wanted to show you the Christ and culture model. Because this Christ and culture model, this model actually helps even more than just a rote answer. Once you know this model, you begin to understand why certain Christians think the way they do about these things. Because you might be a transformationist and you're talking to somebody who is, two kingdoms, and you guys just think completely differently about the world, even though you're both Christian. You guys remember the video I did on voting? I had a pastor I highly respect come in and say he disagreed with my entire video on voting. And after I started asking him questions, I realized it's because he's essentially a counterculturalist while I'm a transformationist. And so he didn't like my participation in the fallen world when I recommended vote this way or vote that way. He would prefer abstaining entirely. And I didn't understand that until I started asking more questions. So these Christ and culture models will help you out. And I want you to know there's kind of problems with all of these models. And so the better thing is to kind of come here towards the center. You get that from Timothy Keller. He wants to draw all of us to come towards the center of the circle rather than being, separated off to the side, stuck in our model. But we all have certain leanings or tendencies, okay? That's what you need to understand. Really good question. Good point. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that content. If you want to go deeper with us, please head down to the description, hit up the links to Twitch and Discord, where you can be part of this awesome community that we're building and be part of the discipleship that we're growing with together. Also, if you would consider hitting like and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. Take care. God bless. Bye now.